Beth Wilson sat in her pristine living room, reviewing quarterly investment reports from her financial management firm. At 62, she had built a comfortable life through careful planning and smart market decisions. The afternoon sun filtered through expensive curtains, casting shadows across mahogany furniture that spoke of years of successful venture capital investments. The doorbell rang, interrupting her concentration. Beth glanced at her watch. 3:47 p.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her housekeeper had left early, and her business partner wouldn't arrive until evening to discuss their latest company acquisition. Through the peephole, she saw a well-dressed black man in his 30s holding a leather briefcase. His expensive suit suggested he might be another financial advisor seeking her business. Beth had grown accustomed to such visits since her investment company had gained recognition in the market. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said when she opened the door. His voice was steady, professional. "My name is Patrick Thompson. I believe we need to talk." Something in his tone made Beth's chest tighten. There was a familiarity she couldn't place, an intensity that went beyond typical business matters. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any appointments scheduled today," she replied, starting to close the door. "Mrs. Wilson," he said firmly, placing his hand gently against the door. "I'm your son." Beth's world tilted. The investment reports scattered from her lap as she stumbled backward. "That's impossible. I don't have—" "You gave birth to me 34 years ago at St. Mary's Hospital," Patrick continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "You were 17, unmarried. The father was a black college student named Carl Thompson." The words hit Beth like physical blows. Memories she had buried for decades came flooding back. The shame, the fear, her parents' rage, the secret pregnancy hidden from their wealthy social circle. She remembered the decision that had haunted her for over 3 decades. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Beth whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Patrick reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "I have the adoption papers, the birth certificate, hospital records." He paused, studying her pale face. "And I have something else you need to see." Beth's legs felt weak. She had spent 34 years trying to forget that terrifying night when she had given birth alone, her parents having arranged everything in secret. The baby had been taken away immediately. She never even saw his face, never held him. Her parents had told everyone she was studying abroad that year. "What do you want?" she managed to ask. Patrick's expression softened slightly. "I want to understand why you gave me up. But more importantly—" He paused, and for the first time, his professional composure cracked. "I need your help, Beth. My daughter is dying." The words hung in the air between them. Beth felt the room spinning as she processed what he had said. A granddaughter she never knew existed. A child who was dying. What's wrong with her? The question escaped before she could stop herself. "Leukemia. She's 8 years old." Patrick's voice was steady, but Beth could see the pain in his eyes. "She needs a bone marrow transplant, and I'm not a match. The doctors say family members have the best chance of being compatible." Beth sank onto her sofa, her mind racing. This man, this son she had never known, was asking her to save a granddaughter she had never met. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had built her fortune through calculated risks and investments, always maintaining control. Now she was faced with the most important decision of her life, and it involved the child she had abandoned 34 years ago. "I've been searching for you for 2 years, Patrick continued. "It wasn't easy. The adoption was sealed, and your parents made sure all traces were hidden. But I'm good at what I do." "What do you do?" Beth asked, surprised by her own curiosity. "I run a venture capital firm specializing in medical technology investments. Thompson Capital Management." He managed a small smile. "Ironic, isn't it? I've spent my career funding companies that develop treatments for diseases like the one that's killing my daughter." Beth's breath caught. Thompson Capital Management was a name she recognized, a respected firm that had been making waves in the biotech investment sector. She had even considered partnering with them on a deal last year. "You're Patrick Thompson of Thompson Capital?" she asked incredulously. "The same Patrick Thompson whose adoption papers show Beth Elizabeth Wilson as his birth mother," he confirmed. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel, a clock that had belonged to Beth's parents, the same parents who had forced her to give up her child. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She had become everything they had wanted her to be, successful, respectable, wealthy, but the cost had been enormous. "I need time to process this," Beth said finally. Patrick nodded, but his expression remained urgent. "I understand this is overwhelming, but Beth, Mom, time is something my daughter doesn't have much of." The word Mom hit Beth like a physical blow. In all her years of success, through all her achievements in the financial world, no one had ever called her that. She had convinced herself she didn't want children, that her career and investments were enough. Patrick reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a photograph. "This is Olympia, your granddaughter." Beth's hand trembled as she looked at the picture. The little girl had Patrick's eyes but lighter skin, with curly brown hair and a bright smile that reminded Beth painfully of her own childhood photos. "She's beautiful," Beth whispered. "She's everything to me," Patrick said simply. "I adopted her when I married her mother 3 years ago. Her biological father abandoned them when she was diagnosed. I've been her dad ever since." Beth felt tears threatening, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in decades. This man, this son she had never known, had done what she couldn't. He had chosen to parent a child who wasn't biologically his. "The doctors say we need to move quickly," Patrick continued. "Every day we wait, her chances get worse. I know this is difficult, but I'm begging you. Please get tested to see if you're a match." Beth looked again at the photograph of the smiling little girl, then at the man sitting across from her. Successful, accomplished, everything she might have hoped her son would become. The same son she had given away without a second thought. "There's something else," Patrick said quietly, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Something you need to know about why I really came here today." Beth looked up, startled by the change in his tone. Patrick's eyes had grown cold, and suddenly Beth realized that this visit wasn't just about saving his daughter's life. There was something else, something he hadn't told her yet. "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Patrick leaned forward, his businessman's mask slipping away to reveal something much more dangerous underneath. "I know what you did after you gave me up, Beth. I know about the investments you made with the money that should have been mine. And I know about the company you destroyed to build your fortune." Beth's blood ran cold. How could he possibly know about that? "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew her lies were catching up with her. Patrick smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Thompson Capital Management wasn't built on medical investments, Beth. It was built on revenge. And after 34 years, I'm finally ready to collect what you owe me." Beth's hands trembled as she set down Olympia's photograph. The room felt smaller suddenly, the expensive furniture and carefully chosen art pieces closing in around her like evidence of her guilt. "I don't know what you think you know," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Her mind was racing back to those early days of building her investment company, the decisions she had made, the corners she had cut. Patrick opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Let me refresh your memory. 33 years ago, you invested in a small pharmaceutical startup called Medicor Technologies. The company was developing a revolutionary cancer treatment. Nothing supernatural, just a more effective combination of existing drugs." Beth's stomach dropped. She remembered Medicor. She remembered everything about that investment, though she had spent decades trying to forget. The company was founded by Dr. Russ Martinez, Patrick continued, his voice taking on the clinical tone of someone reciting facts. A brilliant researcher who had lost his own daughter to leukemia. He poured his life savings into developing this treatment, convinced it could save thousands of children. "That company failed," Beth said weakly. "The market wasn't ready for their approach." "The company failed," Patrick agreed, "but not because of the market. It failed because you orchestrated its destruction." Beth felt the blood drain from her face. How could he possibly know what she had done? She had been so careful, covering her tracks through shell companies and offshore accounts. Patrick pulled out a document and placed it on the coffee table between them. This is a financial analysis I commissioned 2 years ago when I started investigating your background. It shows how you systematically undermined Medicore's funding rounds, spread false information about their clinical trials, and even hired away their key researchers. That's business, Beth said, though her voice was barely a whisper. It's a competitive market. It would have been business, Patrick replied, if you had stopped there. But you didn't. He pulled out another document. You waited until Medicore was desperate, until Dr. Martinez was facing bankruptcy and losing his laboratory. Then you swooped in with a buyout offer, not to save the company, but to acquire their research and patents for pennies on the dollar. Beth remembered that day clearly. Dr. Martinez had been so grateful, thinking she was saving his life's work. He had no idea she planned to shelve the research indefinitely, waiting for the perfect moment to profit from it. The treatment they were developing, Patrick continued, eventually became the foundation for what we now know as CAR T-cell therapy. Worth billions in today's market, Dr. Martinez should have been hailed as a pioneer. Instead, he died 3 years later, broken and forgotten, believing he had failed. I didn't kill anyone, Beth protested. But even as she said it, she knew how hollow it sounded. No, you didn't pull a trigger or give anyone poison, Patrick agreed. But you destroyed a man's life, stole his work, and delayed a cancer treatment that could have saved thousands of children over the past 3 decades. He paused, his eyes boring into hers. Including Olympia. The words hit Beth like a physical blow. She sank deeper into her sofa, the weight of what Patrick was saying settling over her like a suffocating blanket. That's impossible, she whispered. Olympia has leukemia, not the type of cancer that treatment was designed for. Actually, it was, Patrick said quietly. Dr. Martinez's research focused specifically on pediatric leukemia because of his daughter. The treatment protocols you buried in your corporate vault were exactly what Olympia needs. Beth felt sick. All these years, she had told herself that her ruthless business practices were just that, business. She had never considered the human cost of her decisions, the lives that might have been saved if she had allowed Medicore to continue its work. But that's not all, Patrick continued. After you acquired Medicore's assets, you used them as collateral for your next venture capital investments. The profits from those investments funded the expansion of Wilson Financial Management. Your entire empire was built on the grave of that company. Beth's mind reeled. Wilson Financial Management had grown from a small investment firm to a major player in the venture capital market over the past 30 years. She had always been proud of her success, of pulling herself up from the shame of her teenage pregnancy to become a respected businesswoman. How do you know all this? She asked. Patrick's expression softened slightly, but not with forgiveness, with pity. Because Dr. Martinez was my adoptive grandfather. Beth's world tilted again. What? The family that adopted me, the Thompsons. They took me in when I was 3 days old. Joseph Thompson was Dr. Martinez's research partner at Medicore. When the company failed, he left the pharmaceutical industry and became a college professor. But he never forgot what happened to his friend. Patrick reached into his briefcase and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a younger Joseph Thompson standing next to a Hispanic man in a laboratory coat. Both men were smiling, surrounded by research equipment and charts. Joseph told me the story when I turned 18, Patrick continued. How a brilliant researcher had been destroyed by corporate greed. How a treatment that could have saved countless children was buried by someone who cared more about profit than people. Beth stared at the photograph, recognition dawning. She remembered Joseph Thompson now, the quiet partner who had tried to warn Dr. Martinez about her true intentions. She had dismissed him as naive, convinced he would never be able to prove anything. Joseph spent years trying to track down what happened to the research, Patrick said. He knew someone had acquired the patents, but the shell companies and offshore accounts made it nearly impossible to follow the trail. It wasn't until I started my own investment firm that I had the resources to hire forensic accountants and private investigators. Why? Beth asked. Why go to all this trouble? Patrick's expression hardened again. Because Joseph Thompson didn't just adopt me. He saved me. The first family that took me in returned me to the agency after 6 months. They said I was too difficult. The second family kept me for 2 years before deciding they wanted a different child. Joseph and his wife Sonia were my third placement, and they were the first people who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Beth felt tears stinging her eyes. She had never thought about what happened to her son after the adoption. She had forced herself not to think about it, telling herself it was better for everyone if she just moved on. Joseph died 5 years ago, Patrick continued. Cancer, ironically. But before he died, he made me promise to find the truth about Medicor. He said Dr. Martinez deserved justice, even if it came decades too late. And now you want revenge, Beth said. I wanted revenge, Patrick corrected. For 2 years, I've been planning how to destroy you the same way you destroyed Dr. Martinez. I've been systematically targeting your investments, driving down the value of your portfolio companies, even convincing some of your biggest clients to move their money elsewhere. Beth's eyes widened. She had noticed the unusual string of bad luck her company had experienced recently. Deals falling through at the last minute, clients suddenly deciding to change investment advisors, promising startups failing just as she was about to commit funding. That was you? Patrick nodded. Thompson Capital Management has been very strategic about competing with Wilson Financial. We've been patient, methodical, just like you were with Medicor. Beth felt her world crumbling around her. Everything she had built, everything she was proud of, had been under attack for 2 years, and she hadn't even realized it. But then Olympia got sick, Patrick continued, his voice breaking slightly. And suddenly, revenge didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was saving her life. He pulled out another photograph, this one showing Olympia in a hospital bed, thin and pale but still smiling. Connected to IVs and monitors, she looked impossibly small and vulnerable. I could continue destroying your company, Patrick said. I could expose what you did to Medicor, ruin your reputation, maybe even pursue criminal charges for corporate fraud. But none of that, Patrick, saved my daughter. Beth looked at the photograph, then at Patrick's face. Despite everything, the anger, the quest for revenge, the years of planning, she could see that he was, above all else, a father desperate to save his child. What do you want from me? She asked quietly. I want you to get tested to see if you're a compatible bone marrow donor, Patrick said. And if you're not, I want you to help me find other family members who might be. I don't have any other family, Beth said. My parents died years ago. I never had any other children. What about your parents' families? Aunts, uncles, cousins? Beth shook her head. My parents cut ties with most of their relatives when I got pregnant. They were too ashamed. Patrick's jaw tightened. So you're telling me that you might be Olympia's only hope? Beth nodded, the weight of that responsibility settling over her like a lead blanket. There's something else, Patrick said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge again. Something I haven't told you yet. Beth looked up, startled by the change in his tone. She had thought they were past the worst revelations, but clearly there was more. I know about the trust fund, Patrick said quietly. Beth's blood turned to ice. What trust fund? Patrick's smile was cold and knowing. The one your parents set up for me after I was born. The one that was supposed to provide for my education and care. The one you've been stealing from for 34 years. Beth's face went white as the blood drained from her cheeks. She gripped the arm of her sofa so tightly her knuckles turned pale. There was no trust fund, she whispered, but her voice lacked any conviction. Patrick reached into his briefcase and pulled out a leather-bound folder, thick with documents. First National Bank of Hartford, account number 847291TC. Established October 15, 1991, 3 days after I was born. He opened the folder and showed her the top document. Initial deposit, $500,000. Beth's mouth went dry. She remembered that account, remembered the arguments with her parents about it. Her father had insisted on setting up the trust, saying it would ease his conscience about forcing her to give up the baby. Her mother had been furious, claiming they were rewarding Beth's mistake. Your father was more honorable than you gave him credit for, Patrick continued, pulling out bank statements. He didn't just set up the trust with that initial deposit. He continued funding it throughout his life, Annual contributions of $50,000 for 23 years, until he died in 2014. Beth's hands trembled as she looked at the statements. The numbers swam before her eyes as she calculated the total. $500,000 initial deposit, plus $50,000 annually for 23 years, plus compound interest over 3 decades. It would be worth millions by now. When your father died, Patrick continued, the trust was valued at $2.8 million. The terms were clear. I would gain access to the funds on my 25th birthday, with you serving as the trustee until then. I was never made trustee, Beth protested weakly. Patrick pulled out another document. According to these legal papers, filed with the probate court, you became the successor trustee after your father's death. The bank has been sending you quarterly statements for the past 10 years. Beth's mind raced. She remembered receiving those statements, remembered the quarterly reports showing the growing balance, but she had convinced herself it was just another one of her father's investments, another asset of his estate that she had inherited. I thought it was part of my inheritance, she said, though even as she spoke, she knew how pathetic it sounded. Did you? Patrick asked quietly. Or did you know exactly what it was and decide to keep it anyway? Beth couldn't answer. The truth was she had known. Deep down, she had always known what that account represented. But over the years, she had convinced herself that Patrick was better off without it, that he had been adopted by a good family and didn't need the money. Show me the withdrawals, she whispered. Patrick flipped through the statements, pointing to highlighted entries. First withdrawal, December 2014, right after your father's funeral. $50,000, transferred to Wilson Financial Management's operating account. Beth remembered that transfer. Her company had been going through a rough patch, and she needed capital to cover payroll and operating expenses. She had told herself it was just a temporary loan, that she would pay it back. Second withdrawal, March 2015. $100,000, used as seed money for your investment in TechFlow Solutions. Patrick's voice was matter-of-fact, but Beth could hear the anger underneath. That investment returned 300% profit within 2 years. Beth felt sick. TechFlow had been one of her most successful early investments, the one that had established her reputation in the tech venture capital market. She had used Patrick's money to fund it, then kept all the profits for herself. Third withdrawal, August 2015. $200,000, used to acquire a controlling stake in Morrison Manufacturing. Patrick continued reading from the statements. That company was later sold to a larger corporation for $1.2 million in profit. The pattern continued, withdrawal after withdrawal, each one funded by money that should have gone to Patrick. Beth had used his trust fund as her personal bank account, borrowing from it whenever she needed capital for new investments, never intending to pay it back. The largest withdrawal, Patrick said, his voice growing harder, was in 2018. $800,000, used to fund your acquisition of the Medicor patents and research. Beth's stomach lurched. She had used Patrick's own money to buy the stolen research that could have saved his daughter's life. The irony was too cruel to bear. By my calculations, Patrick continued, you've withdrawn $2.6 million from my trust fund over the past 10 years. The current balance is less than $200,000. I can pay it back, Beth said desperately. With interest, I can transfer the money tomorrow. Patrick shook his head. It's not about the money anymore, Beth. It's about what that money represents. My adoptive parents, Joseph and Sonia Thompson, they struggled financially their entire lives. Joseph worked 2 jobs to put me through college. Sonia took in sewing to help pay for my textbooks. Beth felt tears stinging her eyes as she imagined the life Patrick had lived while she was living in luxury funded by money that should have been his. Do you know how many times I had to skip school activities because we couldn't afford the fees? Patrick asked. How many times I wore clothes from thrift stores while you were buying designer suits with my money? How many times I watched Joseph worry about making mortgage payments while you were living in this mansion? I didn't know, Beth whispered. I didn't know about your life. You didn't want to know, Patrick corrected. You made a choice to forget I existed, and then you made another choice to steal from me when it was convenient. Beth looked around her living room, at the expensive furniture, The original artwork, the crystal chandelier that had cost more than most people made in a year. All of it had been funded, at least partially, by money that belonged to her son. "There's more," Patrick said quietly. "Something that Patrick help you understand why I'm really here." Beth looked up, surprised. She thought she had heard the worst of it, but Patrick's expression suggested there were still more revelations to come. "When Olympia was first diagnosed 2 years ago, I was desperate," Patrick said. "I liquidated every asset I had, cashed out my retirement accounts, took out loans against my house. The treatment costs were astronomical, and insurance only covered a fraction of it." Beth watched as Patrick's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing the exhausted father underneath. "I was facing bankruptcy," he continued. "My company was struggling because I was spending all my time at the hospital instead of managing investments. My marriage was falling apart from the stress. I was losing everything that mattered to me." "What did you do?" Beth asked softly. "I hired a private investigator to find my birth parents," Patrick said. "I thought maybe I could find family members who might be bone marrow matches. But I also hoped—" He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I hoped maybe I could find people who would help me save my daughter." Beth felt a stab of pain in her chest. While she had been living comfortably off his stolen money, Patrick had been facing the worst crisis of his life alone. "The investigator found you within 3 months," Patrick continued. "But he also found something else. He found the trust fund records, the withdrawal patterns, the paper trail showing how you had been systematically stealing from me." "So you decided to get revenge," Beth said. "I decided to get justice," Patrick corrected. "I used what was left of my resources to start investigating your business practices. That's when I discovered what you had done to Medicorp, how you had stolen Dr. Martinez's research." Patrick pulled out his phone and showed Beth a photo. It was Olympia again, but this time she was standing next to an elderly Hispanic woman in what looked like a hospital room. "Do you know who this is?" Patrick asked. Beth shook her head. "This is Dr. Hilary Martinez, Dr. Russ Martinez's daughter," Patrick said. "She's now one of the leading pediatric oncologists in the country. She's been treating Olympia for the past year." Beth's eyes widened. "She knows about her father's research?" "She knows everything," Patrick said. "She knows about Medicorp, about the stolen patents, about the treatment that could have saved thousands of children. And she knows about you." Beth felt the room spinning. "What does she want?" "Justice for her father," Patrick said simply. "She's been working with me to expose what you did. But more importantly, she's been helping me understand something crucial about Olympia's case." Patrick leaned forward, his eyes intense. "The original Medicorp research wasn't just about one treatment. Dr. Martinez had developed a comprehensive approach that combined multiple therapies. The patents you stole were just part of the puzzle." "What do you mean?" Beth asked. "There are other components of the treatment that were never patented," Patrick explained. "Dr. Martinez kept some of his research private, sharing it only with his daughter before he died. Hilary has been working to reconstruct the complete treatment protocol." Beth felt a flicker of hope. "So Olympia can be treated." "She can be," Patrick said. "But there's a problem. The treatment requires not just the stolen research, but also significant funding for experimental procedures that insurance won't cover. We're talking about millions of dollars." Beth's mind raced. She was beginning to understand where this was leading. "How much?" she asked quietly. $3 million, Patrick said. "The exact amount you stole from my trust fund, plus interest." Beth stared at him, the full scope of his plan becoming clear. "You want me to fund Olympia's treatment with the money I stole from you? I want you to do the right thing," Patrick said. "For once in your life, I want you to put someone else's needs before your own profits." Beth looked at the photograph of Olympia, then at Patrick's face. She could see the desperation there, carefully hidden behind his businessman's facade. He had spent 2 years planning revenge, but in the end, all he really wanted was to save his daughter. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Patrick's expression hardened. "Then I expose everything. The Medicorp theft, the trust fund fraud, the corporate espionage. I destroy your reputation, your company, and your freedom. You'll lose everything, just like Dr. Martinez did." Beth felt trapped. But as she looked at Olympia's photograph again, she realized that maybe this wasn't a trap at all. Maybe it was an opportunity for redemption. "There's something else you need to know," Patrick said, his voice taking on a different tone. "Something about why I really believe you'll help me." Beth looked up, startled by the change in his voice. Patrick reached into his briefcase one final time and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "This is a letter your father wrote to me before he died. The bank was supposed to give it to me when I turned 25, along with access to the trust fund." Beth's hands trembled as she recognized her father's handwriting on the envelope. "He knew you were stealing from the trust," Patrick said quietly, "and he knew exactly why you would eventually have to make things right." Beth stared at the envelope, her father's familiar handwriting blurring through her tears. George Wilson had died 7 years ago, taking with him decades of family secrets and unspoken disappointments. She had thought she understood her relationship with him, distant, formal, built on mutual respect for financial success rather than emotional connection. "How long have you had this?" she whispered. "The bank gave it to me when I first contacted them about the trust fund irregularities," Patrick said. "Your father left specific instructions. If anyone ever questioned the trust fund withdrawals, they were to provide this letter to me immediately." With trembling fingers, Beth reached for the envelope. Her name was written on the front in her father's careful script. "For Beth, when the time comes to face the truth." Patrick watched silently as she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The paper was expensive stationery, the kind her father had always used for important business correspondence. "My dear Beth," she read aloud, her voice barely audible. "If you are reading this letter, it means that your son has discovered what you have done with his trust fund. I want you to know that I have been aware of your withdrawals for some time." Beth's hands shook as she continued reading. "I could have stopped you at any point. I could have changed the account access or appointed a different trustee. But I chose not to, because I believed that someday you would need to face the consequences of your choices." She looked up at Patrick, confused. "He knew? He knew I was taking the money?" Patrick nodded grimly. "Keep reading." Beth returned to the letter. "You see, my daughter, I made many mistakes as a father. I was so concerned with protecting our family's reputation that I forgot to protect what truly mattered, your happiness and the well-being of your child. When I forced you to give up your son, I told myself it was for the best. I convinced myself that a teenage mother could never provide the life he deserved." The words hit Beth like physical blows. She had spent 34 years believing her parents had simply been ashamed of her pregnancy. She never realized her father had struggled with guilt about their decision. But as the years passed, the letter continued, "I watched you build your business empire with the same ruthless determination I had once admired in myself. I saw how you compartmentalized your emotions, how you convinced yourself that success justified any sacrifice. I recognized these traits because I had taught them to you." Beth felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Her father's words were stripping away the carefully constructed justifications she had built around her life choices. "I began to understand that giving up your son had not freed you to pursue success. It had made you afraid to pursue anything meaningful. You threw yourself into business because it was safer than risking your heart again. You accumulated wealth because it gave you the illusion of control over a world that had taken your child away." Patrick leaned forward, watching Beth's face as she absorbed her father's words. "So when I established the trust fund," she continued reading, "I did so knowing that it would serve as a test. Would you respect your son's inheritance, or would you treat it as another asset to be exploited? Would you think of him as a person deserving of care, or as a problem that had been solved?" Beth's voice broke as she read the next paragraph. "I am sorry to say that your actions have answered those questions, but I am not writing this letter to condemn you, my dear daughter. I am writing to give you an opportunity for redemption." She looked up at Patrick, her eyes red with tears. "He planned this, all of it." "Keep reading," Patrick said quietly. "By the time you read this letter," Beth continued, "your son Patrick be a grown man facing a crisis that money can solve. This is not a coincidence. I have been tracking his life through private investigators since the day he was adopted. I know about his adoptive family, his education, his struggles, and his successes. Beth's eyes widened. Her father had been watching Patrick's life unfold while she had forced herself to forget he existed. I know about Joseph Thompson's connection to Dr. Martinez and Medicor Technologies, the letter continued. I know about the research you stole and the lives that were lost because of your greed. I have been waiting for the moment when these sins would converge with your relationship to your son. Beth felt dizzy. Her father had known about Medicor, about what she had done to Dr. Martinez. He had known everything. I believe, the letter read, that when that moment comes, you, Patrick, finally understand the true cost of the choices you have made. Not just the financial cost, but the human cost. Not just what you have taken from others, but what you have taken from yourself. Patrick stood up and walked to the window, giving Beth space to process her father's words. The afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. The trust fund money you have taken belongs to your son, the letter continued. But more than that, it represents every birthday you missed, every milestone you chose not to witness, every moment of connection you sacrificed for the illusion of security. You cannot buy back those lost years, Beth, but you can choose to be present for the years that remain. Beth sobbed openly now, the weight of 34 years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. She thought of all the birthdays she had deliberately forgotten, all the times she had wondered what Patrick was doing, but forced herself not to find out. If you are reading this letter, her father's words continued, it means your son needs you. Not your money, though that too is his by right. He needs his mother, and perhaps, if you allow it, you need your son as well. She looked at Patrick, who was still standing by the window. His shoulders were tense, his hands clasped behind his back. She could see the little boy in his posture, the child who had waited for a mother who never came. I have left specific instructions with my attorney, the letter read. If you choose to restore your son's trust fund and use it for its intended purpose, I have arranged for an additional inheritance to be released to you. Not money, something more valuable. Something that Patrick help you understand the man your son has become. Beth looked up sharply. What additional inheritance? Patrick turned from the window. I was wondering when you would ask about that. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small wooden box. Your father gave this to his attorney 30 years ago, with instructions to give it to you if you ever chose to do the right thing regarding the trust fund. Beth took the box with trembling hands. It was made of cherry wood, with her initials carved into the lid. Inside, she found dozens of photographs, letters, and documents. The first photograph showed a 3-year-old Patrick with his adoptive parents, Joseph and Sonia Thompson. He was smiling, wearing a little suit, and holding a diploma from preschool graduation. My father was watching him, she whispered. Every major milestone, Patrick confirmed. Birthdays, graduations, school plays, soccer games. He hired photographers to document everything. Beth flipped through the photographs, watching her son grow up in snapshots. Patrick learning to ride a bike. Patrick in his high school graduation gown. Patrick on his wedding day, beaming next to a beautiful woman with kind eyes. This is Olympia's mother, Patrick said, pointing to the wedding photo. Anna. She died in a car accident when Olympia was 5. Beth felt her heart break a little more. This man had faced so much loss in his life, and she had added to it by abandoning him. Among the photographs were report cards, newspaper clippings about Patrick's business successes, and even a copy of his college thesis on ethical investment strategies. Her father had collected every piece of information he could find about his grandson's life. At the bottom of the box was a letter addressed to Beth in her father's handwriting. Unlike the first letter, this one was sealed with wax. He said you could only open this one if you agreed to restore the trust fund, Patrick said. Beth looked at the sealed letter, then at Patrick. What do you want me to do? I want you to get tested to see if you're a bone marrow match for Olympia, Patrick said. And I want you to transfer $3 million to cover her treatment costs, money that should have been mine anyway. And if I do that, we're even? Beth asked. Patrick shook his head. We'll never be even, Beth. You can't undo 34 years of abandonment with one check. But you can choose to be Olympia's grandmother instead of a stranger. You can choose to be my mother instead of just the woman who gave birth to me. Beth felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Everything she had built, everything she had achieved, had been funded by money stolen from her own son. She had convinced herself that success justified her choices, but now she saw the true cost of her ambition. "What if I'm not a bone marrow match?" she asked. "Then we find other options," Patrick said. "Dr. Martinez, Hillary, has been working on alternative treatments, but they're even more expensive and experimental." Beth looked at Olympia's photograph again, studying the little girl's face. She saw hints of Patrick in her features, and perhaps even something of herself in the child's determined expression. "If I agree to this," Beth said slowly, "what guarantee do I have that you won't expose everything anyway? What's to stop you from taking the money and then destroying my reputation?" Patrick was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "Because Olympia deserves to have a grandmother who isn't in prison for corporate fraud. Because I'd rather build a future with you than destroy your past." Beth felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she had built around her heart beginning to crack. For 34 years, she had convinced herself that she didn't need family, that business success was enough. But looking at Patrick now, she realized how empty her life had become. "There's something else," Patrick said quietly. "Something I haven't told you about Olympia's condition." Beth looked up, startled. "What?" Patrick's expression grew grave. "The doctors say that even with the bone marrow transplant and the experimental treatment, Olympia's chances are only 50-50, and if we don't begin treatment within the next month, those chances drop to less than 20%. Beth felt the urgency of the situation hitting her like a physical force. "A month? The cancer is aggressive," Patrick explained. "Every day we delay treatment, it spreads further. That's why I couldn't wait any longer to find. That's why I had to take the risk of revealing everything." Beth stared at him, understanding finally dawning. "You're not here for revenge. You're here because your daughter is dying, and I might be her only hope." Patrick nodded, his professional composure finally cracking completely. "I would do anything to save her, Beth. Anything, including forgiving the woman who abandoned me and stole my inheritance." Beth felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what Patrick was offering. He was Patricking, to set aside 34 years of pain and anger for the chance to save his daughter. He was giving her an opportunity to be part of their lives, despite everything she had done. "But there's one more thing you need to know," Patrick said, his voice taking on an ominous tone. "Something about why the timing of all this is so critical." Beth looked up, her heart sinking as she realized there was still more to this story. Patrick pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. The headline made her blood run cold. "Federal investigation into corporate fraud schemes targets major investment firms." "The FBI has been investigating financial crimes in the venture capital industry," Patrick said quietly. "Specifically, they're looking into cases of trust fund fraud and stolen intellectual property. They're expected to announce indictments within the next 2 weeks. Beth's world tilted as she realized the true urgency of Patrick's visit. He wasn't just asking her to save Olympia's life. He was offering her a chance to make things right before law enforcement made that impossible. Beth stared at the FBI headline until the words blurred together. "How long have you known about the investigation?" 6 months, Patrick replied, putting his phone away. "One of my clients at Thompson Capital works for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He mentioned that several investment firms were under scrutiny for trust fund irregularities and intellectual property theft. And you didn't think to warn me?" Beth's voice was bitter, though she knew she had no right to expect loyalty from the son she had abandoned. "Warn you?" Patrick's laugh was hollow. "Beth, you stole millions of dollars from me and destroyed innocent people's lives. Why would I warn you?" Beth sank deeper into her sofa, the weight of her situation crushing down on her. "But you're warning me now." "I'm giving you a choice," Patrick corrected. "The same choice you gave Dr. Martinez 33 years ago. Except this time you have a chance to choose differently." Beth looked at the photographs scattered around her, images of the son she never knew, the granddaughter she might never meet. "What exactly are you proposing?" Patrick sat down across from her, his business manner returning. "Tomorrow morning, you transfer $3 million to a medical trust account I've established for Olympia's treatment. You also signed documents officially transferring the remaining trust fund balance back to me. And in return? In return, I withdraw the complaint I filed with the FBI about the trust fund fraud, Patrick said. I can't undo their investigation into Medicor. Too many people know about that now. But the trust fund matter is between family members. If we resolve it privately, they have no case. Beth felt a glimmer of hope. What about the Medicor investigation? Patrick's expression hardened. That depends on what happens with Olympia's treatment. If you help save my daughter's life, I'll do everything in my power to minimize your legal exposure. If you don't, he shrugged. I have no reason to protect you. Beth understood the calculation. Patrick was offering her a partial reprieve in exchange for saving Olympia, but he wasn't letting her escape consequences entirely. It was more than she deserved, and they both knew it. I need to get tested first, she said quietly, to see if I'm even a bone marrow match. I've already arranged for that, Patrick said, pulling out a business card. Dr. Hilary Martinez is expecting you at her clinic tomorrow at 9 a.m. The blood work, Patrick, take a few hours, and we'll have results by evening. Beth took the card, noting the address was only 20 minutes from her house. You were very confident I would agree. I was hopeful you still had some humanity left, Patrick replied. Despite everything you've done. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 34 years of secrets hanging between them. Beth found herself studying Patrick's face, looking for traces of herself or her parents in his features. She could see her father's determined jawline, her own stubborn eyes. Tell me about Olympia, she said finally. Patrick's expression softened immediately. She's extraordinary, brave beyond her years, but still just a little girl who wants to go back to school and play with her friends. He pulled out his phone and showed Beth a video. In it, Olympia was sitting in a hospital bed, her head covered with a colorful scarf. She was reading a book aloud to a group of other young patients, her voice clear and confident despite her obvious illness. She does this every week, Patrick explained. Reads to the younger kids who are too sick to leave their rooms. The nurses call her the ward's little librarian. Beth felt her throat tighten. She looks like you when you were young. Patrick paused the video, surprised. You remember what I looked like? Beth stopped, realizing she had just admitted to something she had denied for decades. I saw you once, when you were about her age. Patrick stared at her. What? Beth's hands trembled as she spoke. It was at Joseph Thompson's house. I had gone there to check on some investment opportunities in his neighborhood. I saw you playing in the backyard. You came to my house? Patrick's voice was incredulous. I didn't plan it, Beth said quickly. I was just driving through the area, and I recognized the address from the adoption papers. I parked across the street and watched you for maybe 10 minutes. Patrick leaned forward. What did you see? Beth closed her eyes, remembering that day clearly for the first time in decades. You were building something with blocks. A castle, I think. Joseph was helping you, and you were so happy, animated. You kept showing him different ways to make the towers taller. I remember that day, Patrick said quietly. Dad helped me build a castle that was taller than I was. I was so proud of it. When I saw how happy you were, Beth continued, I convinced myself that I had made the right choice, that you were better off without me. But you never came back. No, Beth whispered. I was too afraid. Afraid that seeing you would make me want to disrupt your life. Afraid that I wasn't strong enough to walk away a second time. Patrick was quiet for a long moment. Do you know what the worst part was? Growing up, I used to make up stories about my birth parents. I imagined that my mother was a spy or a movie star, or someone important who couldn't raise a child but still loved me from far away. Beth felt tears stinging her eyes. Patrick, I never imagined that she was just someone who was too selfish to be inconvenienced by a child, he continued. Someone who would rather steal from me than acknowledge I existed. The words hit Beth like physical blows, but she knew she deserved them. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to try to do better now. Patrick studied her face for a long moment. The question is, are you Patricking to actually be a grandmother to Olympia? Or are you just trying to avoid prison? Beth looked at the photograph of Olympia again, really seeing the child this time instead of just her own guilt. I don't know how to be a grandmother. I don't know how to be a mother either. I failed at that 34 years ago. You were 17 and scared, Patrick said. You're 62 now. What's your excuse this time? Beth felt something shift inside her chest. A wall she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. I don't have one, she admitted. I'm just terrified. Of what? Of caring about someone more than myself, Beth said honestly. Of having something to lose that money can't replace. Patrick's expression softened slightly. That's what love is, Beth. It's choosing to be vulnerable because someone else's happiness matters more than your own safety. Beth thought about that for a moment. She had spent her entire adult life avoiding vulnerability, building walls of wealth and success to protect herself from ever being hurt again. But looking at Olympia's photograph, she realized that those walls had also kept her from experiencing anything meaningful. If I do this, she said slowly, if I help save Olympia's life, what happens next? Do we just pretend to be a family? We don't pretend anything, Patrick replied. We figure it out as we go. Olympia deserves to know her grandmother, but only if you're Patricking to be present in her life. Really present, not just financially. Beth nodded, understanding the distinction. And you? Are you Patricking to let me be your mother after all these years? Patrick was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he said finally. I've spent so many years being angry at you that I'm not sure what's underneath that anger. But for Olympia's sake, I'm Patricking to try. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Beth felt a spark of hope that she hadn't experienced in decades. There's something else you should know, Patrick said, his tone becoming more serious. About the FBI investigation. Beth's stomach clenched. What? They're not just looking at trust fund fraud and stolen intellectual property, Patrick said. They're investigating a pattern of corporate espionage that goes back decades. Companies being systematically destroyed through market manipulation, insider trading, and patent theft. Beth felt the blood drain from her face. How many companies? At least 17 that they've identified so far, Patrick said. Medicor was just the beginning. They think there's a network of investors who specialize in corporate sabotage for profit. A network? Beth's voice was barely a whisper. Patrick nodded grimly. They believe someone has been coordinating these attacks, providing intelligence and funding to take down specific companies. Someone with significant resources and connections in the venture capital world. Beth's mind raced. Over the years, she had occasionally worked with other investors on deals, sharing information and coordinating strategies. She had always thought of it as normal business networking, but now she wondered if she had been part of something larger and more sinister. Do they have suspects? She asked. They have a list of potential conspirators, Patrick said. Investors who have profited from multiple company failures, who have patterns of acquiring distressed assets, who have connections to each other through shell companies and offshore accounts. Beth felt sick. Am I on that list? You're near the top of it, Patrick confirmed. But here's the thing. The FBI thinks you might be a victim as much as a perpetrator. Beth looked up, surprised. What do you mean? Patrick leaned forward. They think someone has been manipulating you, using your ambition and greed to carry out their agenda. They think you might have information about the real mastermind behind this network. Who? Patrick's expression grew dark. Someone who knew about your past, about the adoption, about your vulnerabilities. Someone who guided your early investment decisions and helped you acquire the Medicor patents. Beth's blood turned to ice as she realized what Patrick was suggesting. You think someone orchestrated my entire career? I think someone has been using you for 30 years, Patrick said, and I think they're about to cut you loose to take the fall for their crimes. Beth felt the room spinning around her. Everything she had built, everything she thought she had achieved through her own intelligence and determination, might have been part of someone else's plan. Who would do that to me? She whispered. Patrick pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. It was an older man in an expensive suit, standing next to Beth at what looked like a business conference. Beth's heart stopped. She recognized the man immediately. Mitch Blackwood, she breathed. My business mentor. The same Mitch Blackwood who introduced you to your first major investors, Patrick said. Who helped you establish Wilson Financial Management, who provided you with the intelligence that allowed you to destroy Medicor and acquire their patents. Beth felt everything clicking into place. Mitch had been there for every major decision in her career, offering guidance and opportunities that seemed too good to be true. She had thought he was helping her out of respect for her business acumen, but now she realized he had been using her all along. He knows about the FBI investigation, Patrick continued. In fact, he's the one who tipped them off about your activities. He's been positioning himself as a concerned citizen who discovered irregularities in your business practices. Beth stared at Patrick, the full scope of her betrayal becoming clear. He's going to let me take the fall for everything. Patrick nodded gravely. Unless we stop him first. The next morning, Beth sat in Dr. Hilary Martinez's clinic waiting room, her hands trembling as she filled out medical forms. The blood test for bone marrow compatibility was simple. Just a small vial drawn from her arm, but the weight of what it represented felt enormous. Dr. Martinez emerged from her office, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes that reminded Beth painfully of the photograph Patrick had shown her of Dr. Russ Martinez. The family resemblance was unmistakable. "Mrs. Wilson," Dr. Martinez said, extending her hand. "I'm Hillary. Thank you for coming." Beth shook her hand, surprised by the warmth in the doctor's voice. She had expected anger, condemnation, perhaps even refusal to treat her as a patient. Instead, Dr. Martinez seemed genuinely grateful for her presence. "I need you to know," Beth said as they walked to the examination room. "I understand what I took from your father, what my actions cost him and cost the world." Dr. Martinez paused in the hallway. "My father died believing he had failed, Mrs. Wilson. But his research lives on through his notes, through my work, and through patients like Olympia. If you help save her life, you'll be honoring his memory in the most meaningful way possible." The blood draw took only minutes, but Dr. Martinez explained that the compatibility analysis would take several hours. "We're looking for specific protein markers," she said. "The closer the match, the better Olympia's chances of accepting the transplant." As they waited for results, Beth found herself in an unexpected conversation with the doctor about her father's work, about the years of research that had been stolen and shelved, about the children who might have been saved if the treatment had been developed decades earlier. "Patrick tells me you're working to reconstruct the complete treatment protocol," Beth said. Dr. Martinez nodded. "My father kept extensive private notes. The patents you acquired were just part of his research, the part he thought was ready for commercial development. But he had ideas for combination therapies, for personalized treatments based on genetic markers, revolutionary concepts that were ahead of their time. And now? Now we have the technology to make his vision reality," Dr. Martinez said. "But it requires significant investment, and most pharmaceutical companies aren't interested in treatments that can't be easily monetized." Beth understood the implication. "That's why you need the $3 million. It's not just about Olympia," Dr. Martinez explained. "If we can prove this treatment works, we can help hundreds of other children. We can finally bring my father's work to the world." As they talked, Beth felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, a sense of purpose beyond personal profit. For the first time, she understood how her money could create something meaningful instead of just accumulating more wealth. Patrick arrived in the afternoon with Olympia, who was scheduled for pre-treatment consultations while they waited for Beth's test results. When the little girl walked into the clinic, Beth felt her breath catch. Olympia was smaller than she had appeared in photographs, thinner, but her eyes were bright with curiosity. She wore a cheerful yellow hat that covered her head, and she carried a worn, stuffed rabbit under one arm. "Olympia," Patrick said gently, "I'd like you to meet someone very special. This is Beth, your grandmother." Olympia studied Beth with the directness that only children possess. "You're my daddy's mommy?" Beth knelt down to Olympia's eye level, tears threatening to spill over. "Yes, sweetheart, I am. Daddy said you've been looking for us for a long time," Olympia said seriously. "Is that true?" Beth glanced at Patrick, who gave her an encouraging nod. She realized he had prepared Olympia for this meeting in the kindest way possible, creating a story that protected the child from the harsh realities of abandonment and betrayal. "Yes," Beth said softly. I've been looking for you and your daddy for a very long time. Olympia considered this, then stepped forward and hugged Beth unexpectedly. The small arms around her neck broke something loose in Beth's chest. 34 years of suppressed maternal instinct flooding through her all at once. Patrick, you help me get better? Olympia whispered in her ear. I'm going to try my very best, Beth whispered back, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Dr. Martinez called them into her office late in the afternoon. She was smiling as she reviewed the test results. It's not a perfect match, she said, but it's very close. Close enough that we can proceed with the transplant if Olympia's condition remains stable. Beth felt a surge of relief and hope. What are the chances of success? With the bone marrow transplant alone, about 60%, Dr. Martinez said. But combined with the experimental therapy we've developed based on my father's research, we're looking at closer to 85%. Patrick reached over and squeezed Beth's hand. Thank you, he said simply. Beth looked at Olympia, who was playing quietly with her stuffed rabbit, oblivious to the adult conversation about percentages and procedures that would determine her future. When do we start? Beth asked. As soon as you transfer the funds for the treatment, Dr. Martinez said. We can begin preparation immediately. Beth pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. With trembling fingers, she initiated a wire transfer for $3 million to the medical trust account Patrick had established. It represented most of her liquid assets, money she had accumulated over decades of ruthless business practices. Done, she said, showing Patrick the confirmation screen. But their moment of hope was interrupted by Beth's phone ringing. The caller ID showed Mitch Blackwood's name, and Beth felt her stomach clench. Answer it, Patrick said quietly. But put it on speaker. Beth accepted the call, her hand shaking as she activated the speakerphone. Beth, my dear. Mitch's voice was smooth, paternal. I hope you're having a pleasant day. Hello, Mitch, Beth said, trying to keep her voice steady. I was wondering if you might have time for dinner this evening, Mitch continued. There are some urgent business matters we need to discuss. Some rather unpleasant rumors circulating about Wilson Financial Management. Beth and Patrick exchanged glances. What kind of rumors? Oh, nothing too serious, Mitch said, but his tone suggested otherwise. Some questions about client trust funds, some concerns about your investment methodologies. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding, but I think it would be wise for us to coordinate our response. Beth understood the subtext. Mitch was offering her one final chance to fall in line, to accept her role as the scapegoat in his larger scheme. I'm afraid I can't make dinner tonight, Beth said. I have family obligations. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Family obligations? Beth, you don't have any family. Actually, I do, Beth said, looking at Patrick and Olympia. I have a son and a granddaughter. Another pause, longer this time. When Mitch spoke again, his voice had lost its paternal warmth. I see. Well, that's unexpected. I hope you understand that family sentiment won't protect you from the consequences of your past decisions, Beth. The FBI investigation is quite thorough. I'm sure it is, Beth said. I'm also sure they'll be very interested to learn about your role in orchestrating those decisions. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Mitch finally spoke, his voice was ice cold. I'm not sure what you think you know, Beth, but I would be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. Very careful indeed. The line went dead. Patrick looked at Beth with new respect. That was brave. That was stupid, Beth corrected. I just declared war on a man who has been manipulating me for 30 years. He has resources, connections, evidence that could destroy me. But now, we know he's worried, Patrick said. If he wasn't concerned about exposure, he wouldn't have called. Dr. Martinez had been listening to the conversation with growing concern. Is Olympia going to be safe? If this man is as dangerous as you suggest, Olympia Patrick be protected, Patrick said firmly. I've already arranged for private security at the hospital during her treatment. And Beth, he looked at her seriously, you need to disappear for a while, at least until we can gather enough evidence to take Mitch down. Beth shook her head. I'm not running away again. I've spent 34 years running from my responsibilities. I'm not going to abandon Olympia when she needs me most. Even if staying means going to prison, Beth looked at Olympia, who had fallen asleep in her chair, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The child's face was peaceful, trusting, completely unaware of the adult complications swirling around her medical treatment. "Especially then," Beth said quietly. "If I go to prison, I want Olympia to remember that her grandmother stayed to fight for her, not that she ran away when things got difficult." Patrick studied her face for a long moment. "You're really Patricking to risk everything for a granddaughter you just met?" Beth thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, she would have said no without hesitation. Her freedom, her wealth, her reputation had been the only things that mattered to her. But looking at Olympia now, understanding what she had missed by abandoning Patrick, she realized her priorities had fundamentally shifted. "I spent 34 years choosing safety over love," she said. "I chose money over meaning, control over connection. I'm not making that choice again." Patrick reached over and took her hand. "Then we do this together. We save Olympia, and we stop Mitch, and we figure out how to be a family." Beth squeezed his hand, feeling something she hadn't experienced since she was 17 years old, hope for a future built on something more substantial than profit margins and investment returns. 3 weeks later, Olympia's bone marrow transplant was declared a complete success. The experimental therapy had worked better than anyone had dared hope, and her cancer was in full remission. Beth spent every day at the hospital, reading stories, playing games, and slowly learning how to be the grandmother she had never imagined she could become. The FBI investigation concluded with Mitch Blackwood's arrest on charges of corporate conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. Beth's cooperation with the investigation, combined with her full restitution of the stolen trust fund money, resulted in a plea agreement that required community service and financial penalties but no prison time. Patrick's private investigators had uncovered evidence of Mitch's manipulation going back 3 decades, showing how he had systematically used Beth and other investors as unknowing pawns in his corporate sabotage network. On a sunny afternoon in spring, Beth sat in Olympia's hospital room, watching her granddaughter work on a puzzle. Patrick was reviewing treatment progress reports with Dr. Martinez, discussing plans for Olympia's long-term care. "Grandma Beth?" Olympia said, looking up from her puzzle. "Yes, sweetheart. When I get out of the hospital, Patrick, you come to my school play? I'm going to be a tree." Beth smiled, feeling tears of joy instead of regret for the first time in decades. "I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." As she helped Olympia with her puzzle, Beth reflected on the year that had changed everything. She had lost most of her fortune, faced public disgrace, and nearly gone to prison. But she had gained something infinitely more valuable, a family that loved her not for what she could provide, but for who she chose to become. The tree Olympia would portray in her school play seemed like the perfect metaphor. After decades of living like a weed, growing wild and choking out everything around her, Beth was finally learning to put down roots, to provide shelter instead of taking resources, to be part of something larger than herself. Outside Olympia's window, spring was painting the world in shades of green and hope. And for the first time in 34 years, Beth Wilson was exactly where she belonged. If you've made it this far, thank you. I hope this story moved something inside you. If it did, maybe it made you cry, maybe it made you think. Consider subscribing. We tell true, emotional stories about redemption, justice, family, and the consequences of silence. Some stories make you angry. Others remind you of what matters. This was one of those stories. I'll see you in the next one.